So, about a year ago, we saw the release of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the fifth and final installment of the adventure film franchise. There was, in my opinion, a lot of interesting discourse leading up to the release. I could probably spend a lot of time breaking that down, but to summarize, the last movie, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, was a while ago, and so fans had 15 years to get excited about the new movie and just hope it would be good. It's pretty crazy to think about. This is probably not my most ever anticipated film of all time, but the one with the longest amount of anticipation time, if that makes sense. And because I was introduced to the series as a kid, probably right around when Crystal Skull came out. I've always loved these movies, but it really wasn't until last year I rewatched all of them. Some of them I hadn't seen in quite a long time, but I realized this is probably my number one single, just favorite film franchise. Yeah, I feel pretty confident saying that. Anyway, Dial of Destiny comes out, and it's just pretty divisive. My thoughts are pretty mixed. I do really like some of the stuff the movie is doing, but I also dislike some of his choices. But this isn't a review, it's a rewrite, as you saw. Now, I don't usually like the idea of fans rewriting a film. I think it's kind of arrogant to suggest that you know better than professional writers that were specifically hired to work on something. In fact, a couple of the creators that I follow that make these kind of videos, they've shifted more to doing like pre-writes and pitches, and I usually do like those. But I'm choosing to do a rewrite video because I did see a way I can make it work and like it and feel good about it. And I definitely respect many of the ideas from the official Dial of Destiny movie, and I'm going to keep a lot of them, but I will also include some other things that weren't originally there. But yeah, not trying to say that this is any better than what we actually got. Really, how I'm going to phrase it is, so considering the official movie, what am I going to do with it? What would I do with it? I'm really asking, what ideas would I include or change? That's really my main goal with this. I'm making this video for myself, really. I guess I do have one other goal to keep in mind. So the official Dial of Destiny movie maybe sort of feels like Disney just made another Indiana Jones movie. With this, I did put a little bit of thought into how this could be the best possible final Indiana Jones movie. There is a difference there, and I've thought about it a pretty good amount. But moving on to something else that I've just spent a lot of time thinking about, here is my idea for a reworked Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Let's get started. So I think you need to be kind of particular about the opening shot of an Indiana Jones movie. The first four movies all do this really cool thing where they fade from the Paramount logo to some other mountain-like image. With this one, I'm assuming that Disney higher-ups, they mandated crediting Disney, then Paramount, then Lucasfilm, probably in that order. So the transition in the official movie is from the Lucasfilm logo. And in that movie, it goes to like a rectangular lock or latch. But if you look at the Lucasfilm logo, it has an arch in it, so I think it might be cool to kind of use that. Like, you could transition to an arch just part of the castle architecture, or if we're doing the Paramount Mountain, transition from the mountain to like a pointed castle top. So yeah, I'm keeping this first set piece mostly the same. I'm kind of just changing some story details and then probably a lot more technical ones. And speaking of the technical ones, the latter, I really want to put the credits at the beginning like all the other movies, and also do a Harrison Ford starring in before the title drop. I usually like my main credits at the end of movies, so you're not really mixing up reading any names of like the key people, and you're also not absorbing anything too important on screen. It's just like focus on the interesting stuff. But you can put the credits at the start of the actual film, you just have to make it work. What you have to do, you have to make sure that the text of all the major actors and directors and stuff, you only put it on screen for like the establishing shots, and then you get to the last name, like directed by, well in this case, James Mangold. I thought he was a good choice, considering that Spielberg was producing rather than directing. But anyway, get to the last opening credit right before the first, like super important shot of the movie. There's like an art to it. So for this, what I have in mind is just like images of the castle, establishing shots of that, and Nazis preparing and loading the train with all the various artifacts. While we're doing that, we get the names for the establishing shots and just all that. And then right after, directed by James Mangold, the first like super important thing we see is that the Nazis are also bringing along 2 hostages onto the artifact plunder train. So these 2 guys, they have sacks over their head, but the one on the first guy is promptly removed as a commanding Nazi officer orders the soldiers what to do with these captured enemies. And as you might have guessed, it's Indiana Jones. I have a few technical notes I want to stick in here. So first, this is de-aged Harrison Ford. I thought the de-aging visual effects looked pretty good in the official movie, but one nitpick I've seen a lot of is that his voice sounds old. It's not something that like everyone's gonna notice, but some people did, and I think it'd be worth it to try and make it pretty accurate to how Ford looked and sounded when he was younger. So like this opening sequence, it's really meant to just be a little taste of like a classic Indiana Jones adventure. So really try and make it feel like that. On that note, I do also want to talk about the musical score for this movie. I like parts of it, but there are some times, especially in this opening sequence, where it's just really repurposing tracks from the other movies, and I just don't really think it works that well. Also, I really would have liked a new and memorable leitmotif for the artifact, since all the other movies have something like that. Maybe you could play around with like a clock-like ticking sound in the score, because the dial deals with time. This might be a controversial statement, but I would have been fine if John Williams actually collaborated with another composer on this. He is a legend, but he's very old, and having some help might have made the score just work better for the movie. And he's done this type of thing before with some other franchises, like themes by John Williams, score by someone else. And I think it's an idea that does work. And I even have a suggestion for which composer to bring in. Somewhat recently, I watched a movie called A Million Ways to Die in the West. It's not like the best comedy around, but I found some of it funny, and it did have a very cute central romance. But I'm mentioning it here because the score by Joel McNeely, it actually kind of goes hard. It's just really great Western music, and there's one track that's actually pretty Indiana Jones-esque. And hey, would you look at that? Joel McNeely actually wrote some music for the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles TV series, which is not a show I've seen yet, but I plan to check it out at some point. So yeah, I'm imagining just a score that works better for the movie, kind of developed by John Williams and Joel McNeely. But anyway, one musical aspect that I would keep, though, is just hearing a little bit of the main Indy theme when he's first revealed. And also, this might be a good place to put the setting text card, like Germany or France or whatever it is, 1940, whatever it is. The card that says the time and place, put that right when Indy's revealed if you haven't featured already. Because Last Crusade, that movie, in its opening, it does something very cool. It kind of hides what year the opening is set until it's revealed that we're actually watching Indy as a young scout. And so this wouldn't have the same effect because we do know it's World War II, but it's a similar idea. Anyway, that was a whole lot of technical details, so let's get back to the story. So the sack is removed from Indy's head. I wrote a little bit of just kind of dialogue maybe that we could somewhat use. The Nazi officer says something like, the spy wasn't alone, he had help, and then he takes the sack off the head of the other guy, and it's from young Dr. Voller here, an American and a traitor to Germany. And then Indy says, you got a lot of nice stuff, other people's stuff, where's it going? Then Voller starts to answer, they're bringing it to, but then the officer interrupts Berlin, and then we could have the line, to the victor go the spoils. The Fuhrer wants to look at all these artifacts. Unfortunately, he won't have time for you two. Indy says maybe, too bad, I love to talk to your Fuhrer. I bet we get along real well. Can you give him a message for me? And then it's revealed that Indy has actually worked his way out of the rope restraints, and he lands a big punch right in the officer's face. And then while Indy is dealing with the officer, eventually kind of knocking him out, Voller also tries to break free, but he isn't able to, and Indy's actually resubdued by the remaining Nazis. So then this duo is brought onto the train, but then left unguarded. They both break free, and Voller leads Indy through the train. You can throw in some more action, but eventually the point is that they reach a car that has comparatively fewer treasures than any others. Voller says it's in this one, and while he's looking elsewhere, Indy opens a box and finds it. So what's it? The Lance of Longinus. He takes a quick look, then signals Voller. Voller can talk up the significance of this artifact for a bit, but eventually Indy announces that it's a fake. His reasoning is that Romans didn't use this type of metal, and Voller agrees. However, the Nazi officer that we saw first, he returns, and then it's a fight between the kind of three of them, well really two, because Voller's not that competent of a fighter. But the lance blade, the Lance of Longinus, is kind of switching hands throughout the fight. But it makes his way to the train roof, the fight, and then it ends with Indy knocking out the officer off the train, kind of like in the official movie, then giving the lance to Voller. So then we could do the same callback of the victor go the spoils line. And then we show the duo getting safely off the train, heading off, and that's pretty much the opening sequence, pretty much the same as the official movie, some changes. Before we move further, I'm going to explain some of the choices. I think this is kind of the pattern I'm going to use for most of this video. Go over some of the story and then explain why I'm doing that, explain the reasoning. So you'll notice that I'm introducing Voller as an ally to Indy here. Later on, he'll serve a similar role to how he was in the official movie, but I'm not doing that right away. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had a character named Mac who just kept changing sides, and you weren't sure if you could ever trust him. He's probably the most annoying character in the franchise, but I think the idea has some potential. So with Voller, I kind of want to try this type of character, but better. Another thing I want to draw attention to is that there's no direct establishment of the Antikythera mechanism as the main artifact. The opening is just about the Lance of Longness. I like the tradition of each film opening up with kind of a side story and adventure and artifact that's just a little disconnected from the main story. Like, these movies aren't called Raiders of the Lost Golden Idol, Indiana Jones and the Urn of Nihrachi, Indiana Jones and the Cross of Coronado Crusade, or Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Roswell Alien. So in this one, we're looking for the Lance of Longness. The significance of it, as I give a moment at Voller to explain. So it's allegedly the blade that cut open Jesus' side when he was crucified. Also, it's often attributed to be one of the artifacts that Hitler was pretty most fascinated by. So the mission that Indy is on is really just to make sure that Hitler doesn't get it. Like, I literally didn't put too much thought into it other than Indiana Jones is cool and Hitler is stupid. But I like the idea of Indiana Jones just doing a mission that would kind of personally affect Hitler's morale, especially during the height of the war, like 1943 or 4. A couple of last things to mention. There are some reasons why Voller was distracted looking around that train car, and there are reasons for why the Lance is determined to be a fake just because of like the type of metal, but those will come back later. As for now, we move on to New York, 1969, with another setting card drop, and that indicates the beginning of the main story. So I want the next section of the film to just feel a little slower. That should be kind of inherent. These movies do have a formula of a pretty thrilling opening followed by taking a bit more time to get to the main adventure. But in this one, I want it to be very noticeable. Indiana Jones is like 70 years old and the time is 1969. That's kind of modern for our hero, and it's just pretty crazy to think about. So really do whatever is needed to just emphasize the weight of this. I think the official film does a pretty decent job with this idea. My issue is that it does take a while for the story to actually get going. So here's how I'm going to rework the sort of call to adventure portion of the movie. I do usually like the scenes of Indy teaching as a professor, and part of me wanted to come up with a scene like that or use the one that's in the official movie, but I'm doing something else for a couple reasons. Story reasoning we'll get to, but in universe, the moon landing, which is going to play a part in this just like the official version, the moon landing was in the summer, so Indy wouldn't really be teaching anyway. So instead, I want to show Indiana Jones enjoying his retirement party. This is the last movie, so he's ending his time as a professor. And many people that he knows are probably going to be there to celebrate. You could really go crazy with all the cameos of characters that you want to include, but here are some of my picks. Sala, obviously. I might like to see Charles Stanforth, the college dean from Crystal Skull. He was played by Jim Broadbent. That could fit, but I guess technically it is a different college this time. So, I don't know, maybe. I don't think it's that likely that we're going to see Willie Scott as Kate Capshaw is retired from acting, but she could probably get a mention of the character. Maybe we could establish that her character went on to marry a famous movie director. I would get a kick out of that. That's funny. If you know, you know. Speaking of love interests, Marion is actually suspiciously absent from this event, but we'll get into later what the detail is and why that is. But the real purpose of this retirement party scene, who we're going to meet, Indy is going to run into Dr. Juan Lee. So if you're wondering who this is, it's a grown-up short round, who's actually one of my favorite Indiana Jones side characters. Juan Lee is the official name. Not sure if it's ever said in Temple of Doom, but it's canon. You probably do have some other questions, though, like why is he a doctor? Well, unlike the official name, there's not a canon explanation for what Shorty did after Temple of Doom beyond just at some point moving to the United States. I'm going to make him a doctor for two reasons. First, Ke Huy Quan is just great. I really loved his return to acting with like Everything Everywhere All at Once and stuff like that. And he really just excels at playing all these nerdy, excitable characters, but that still get cool moments. And I think this type of character would just be great in Indiana Jones, and it would really help give the film some energy. Second, in universe, Shorty is really competent and skilled, so I don't consider him going on to become a doctor. That's not really much of a stretch. because he's just competent. So my idea is he moved to the States shortly after Temple of Doom, and just as he grew up, he got very smart and successful. But unfortunately, he also pretty much lost contact with Indy over the years. I'm not entirely sure how to establish this backstory like in a movie. Maybe we could see old photographs in Indy's apartment. But more about the name, though. I'm also not sure how to convey this in a movie, but I want there to be the idea of Shorty's professional associates using the Juan Lee name, but his personal friends can continue using the nickname that Indy gave him all those years ago, Shorty. So it should be a little bit of a shock, actually, when Indy refers to them as Juan Lee. But anyway, what is Shorty a doctor of? So he's actually been working on the mechanics of the space race with Dr. Jürgen Voller. The United States, in their efforts to, prevail over the Soviet Union, they sought out the skills of not just their own top men, but Germany's as well. So Voller is at the party as well, but he and Shorty are actually in town for the moon landing celebration parade. So this duo, Shorty, Voller, and Indy, they agree to go watch the parade together, and the trio gets talking. All three were kind of previously unaware of the connections that each of the other two had. So we get some tales of adventure talked about, relayed. And when Indy gets to mentioning the train heist from this movie's very opening scene, Voller is reminded of something. So that night on the train, when Indy and him were looking for the Lance Longinus, Voller actually found something else, the Antikythera mechanism. Its purpose and function are kind of mysterious, but Voller believes it has great power, if wielded by those with the knowledge to understand its secrets. He keeps talking. He's tracked it down to a private artifact auction in Tangier, Morocco, which has an in on, and he plans to attend. And the last thing that he mentions about this ancient dial is that he and Juan have just helped master space, so with this they could master time. But just knowing about it is actually dangerous, he says, because many enemies are also after the artifact. Strangely, almost as if on cue, a few men appear and start causing trouble. Voller is grabbed and taken away, and others start to give Indy and Shorty chase. They each kind of go in different directions, and they're separated. So from here, we get the parade chase action scene, very, very similarly to how it went down in the official movie. It was probably my favorite action scene, so I don't want to change very much. Indy chanting, "Hell no, we won't go." That's a great moment. It actually foreshadows a later reveal pretty nicely. And the bit where he's the only one in the crowd that doesn't flinch at the gunshot, that's also a great little moment. And then him riding a horse through the parade and then through the subway. It's a relatively simple but pretty effective action effect to pull off and make exciting. So after the action, Indy and Shorty, they regroup and they talk about what to do. Indy can express that he's intrigued by the dial, but he actually doesn't fully trust Voller. He didn't in the past, and he really doesn't now. So it's instead Shorty who's going to make the decision to go to Morocco and track down Voller. So they head off by plane. We could probably still have Salah setting them off just like in the official film. And then that's the call to adventure portion of the movie wrapped up. So anyway, now just some more details before continuing the story. I really wanted to streamline this section of the movie, and I think I did while still keeping what I liked. So the men who come and cause trouble, they could still include Kleber and Hawk from the official movie. I think Hawk being a big guy, just serving as an obstacle to fight, it's a pretty good tribute to the characters that Pat Roach played in all the earlier films. And I actually think that Kleber is a pretty good character with a good amount of personality. He's just like trigger happy, and I think that's pretty something fun to work with. The one character, Agent Mason, was a part of the CIA and Indy's Wanted subplot in the first act of the official movie. In my opinion, that just doesn't really go anywhere, and it kind of hurts the movie's pacing. So I didn't include that in any of my version. I think Mason did have potential to be an interesting character, but she's not one that's not really interesting in the official movie, and I couldn't think of much to do with her either, so she doesn't exist in my version, unfortunately. So, but that's that. On to Morocco. So we get a classic map travel transition sequence from New York to Morocco. Once we get there, we could have some moments of Indy and Shorty just kind of taking in Tangier as a city, because it's a new location for the franchise. But the destination is a large and fancy hotel where we have the private auction being held. They have a little bit of trouble getting in at first. Shorty could hype Indy up as a famous archaeologist to the bouncer. We could reuse the "you call him Dr. Jones" line maybe. But that line doesn't work. They can't get in. But what does work, Indy is just going to explain that they're associates of Dr. Voller. So they get in. The auction is run by Helena Shaw, and although she's going to serve a different role in the story than the official version, she's pretty much the same character. I thought of an exchange that we could hear as the auction is kind of progressing. Indy can rhetorically ask, "You call this archaeology?" And then Helena can use her line from the official movie, "No, it's called capitalism." I thought that could be a fun bit of dialogue. But the auction progresses, and at the last moment, Voller appears and lands the winning bid. It turns out it was a fixed auction. This was the plan. Voller was never actually in any danger, and he, Helena, and Kleber were actually in league to just acquire the artifact together and then scam some people while getting it. So Voller continues explaining this trio have actually had the dial for a bit of time, but they haven't figured out how to work it. That's why they set up everything to get Indy and Shorty to Tangier. They want them to find a companion artifact to the dial. They want to find the graphos. So before moving on, I want to explain what role Helena is going to serve in my version of the story. I did not really like the character. I didn't really like the character in the official movie, but I know some people did. So I thought of a compromise. She's still going to be in the movie, but she's not Indy's main sidekick. I get the appeal of there being like a femme fatale type character in the movie, and I do think Helena works pretty well as that type of character, but she's going to be just a little less present. The characters in order of importance are probably Indy, Shorty, Voller, then Helena. And yeah, I am having Helena as an antagonist, but she kind of acted like an antagonist to Indy sometimes in the official movie, so it's not really a huge change. That's kind of a trend. I'm changing some things, but I'm really keeping the same characters. I did cut some characters like connected to Helena, like Basil, her father, and Teddy, the young sidekick. I just don't see anything to do with them in my version of the story. I'd also cut whatever the plot point was with Helena's ex, because that just went nowhere. If you want something to replace it, I think maybe her and Kleber could be a fun like antagonist romantic duo, but I also don't think the movie necessarily needs it. Anyway, on with the story. So at this point, I've established Voller as the antagonist, but not really a villain. He wants the Antikythera, and he's been acting pretty manipulative to get it. There's been some like twists and turns, but we don't actually know why he wants it yet. That's going to be revealed later. As for now, though, Indy and Shorty decide that they don't want to work with Voller to find the graphos, but they will look for it themselves. They just don't trust Voller. So the next part of the movie covers them getting from Tangier to Greece. I'm going to keep the idea that the graphos is on the same sunken ship that the dial mechanism was really found on. It's just deeper in the water and harder to get. I don't have a ton of input on when I change in this like section though. Really, just instead of it being Indy and Helena, it's Indy and Shorty. So they snag the dial out of the auction, and then we can still have a version of the tuk-tuk car, the action chase, and then a map travel scene to get to Greece, where they're going to meet Ronaldo. I actually like this character, and I'm also okay with the fact that he's really not in the movie a whole lot. He's a good character. He's just not a huge presence. But they get on his boat. We hear an explanation of his frogman skills, and then he explains that they're going to reach the shipwreck location next morning. And then on the boat at night, Indy and Shorty get to talking about the potential that the artifact has. Voller said it could master time, and that's a super fantastical thing to think about. Like I mentioned earlier, they don't know what Voller wants the device for, but Indy and Shorty get talking about what they could use it for. And then we basically get the same version of what was probably the best scene in the official movie. Indy talking about how he didn't stop Mutt from enlisting in the Vietnam War, and then Mutt's recent death has just deeply saddened Marion. I think Shorty would probably have met Marion, but Shorty would never have met Mutt because I'm envisioning Shorty and Indy lost contact sometime before the events of Crystal Skull. Still, though, this is something just deeply sad to hear, and it just finally explains to Shorty and to the audience why Indy just hasn't really been his usual self. Shorty comforts him, and then the scene ends. We cut, and the sun comes up on the boat. It's the next day, and the group is ready to retrieve the graphos from the shipwreck. The plan is for Indy, Shorty, and Ronaldo to dive, and then the rest of the boat's crew to manage the lines. I think there was a 3-minute time frame to work with, like how much breath you can hold and oxygen and how the lines work. I'm not sure if the official movie does this anyway, but have those 3 minutes kind of play out in real time. I think we have a really interesting piece of the musical score here. It's an interesting set piece, and it would be pretty cool to convey like a ticking time limit with the music. Also, this is where we get the eels, and that's a pretty cool inclusion since they're like snakes, but not really. And every Indiana Jones movie has to have snakes. An idea that I had is that since this is the last film, we could have a scene where Indy just sort of gets over his fear of snakes, but I can't really think of how to include that, either can't really put it here, can't really put it somewhere else. So it's just an idea. I don't think it would fit. But they get the graphos, but at the same time, they're actually intercepted by Voeller's crew. One complaint that I've seen about this official version of the movie is that Voeller and the other antagonists, they're generally able to show up whenever the plot needs them to. I don't really have any ideas how to fix this, but it's really more of a nitpick than something I'd actually want to change. So anyway, Voeller and the other antagonists, they show up. Again, with a lot of this middle section of the movie, I'm not changing too much. I'm just including Shorty as a character. I want him and Indy to work together to reveal the secrets of the graphos. Like, Indy would know a lot about the history of the time period that the Antikythera comes from, and then Shorty would have more mechanical knowledge to kind of get information unlocked out of the artifact. And so said information that I want to reveal is that the ship that was carrying the Antikythera was traveling from Syracuse to Athens, but one remaining piece that actually unlocks the device fully is still with Archimedes. The idea that Archimedes is the creator of the Antikythera mechanism, that's completely made up. It has no basis in the real world, but I do like the backstory and I like the artifact, so I'm keeping it pretty much the same as the official movie. Another thing I'm keeping the same is that Ronaldo still gets killed by the antagonists. My idea is that they would have him held at gunpoint while Indy and Shorty work on the graphos. Indy relays the message, but changes the detail about them going to Syracuse to changes the detail from Syracuse or from Athens to Alexandria to throw off Voeller. Voeller sees through this, though. Archimedes resided in Syracuse, and so Voeller kills Ronaldo anyway. So for Shorty, this is what finally classifies Voeller as not just an antagonist, but a villain. Indy has been pretty wary of the German scientist the whole time, but Shorty did know him from the space race projects and has been less inclined to distrust him. But now Voeller has shown his true colors. Indy and Ronaldo can have a moment similar to the whole Into the Great Unknown bit at the beginning of Temple of Doom with Wuhan. But while that happens, Voeller's team actually gets away with the dial and starts heading to Syracuse. But then shortly after, Indy and Shorty also head there following. We'll have one last map travel scene, and I actually have a special idea for this one. So we can start off with a line showing the villains traveling from the shipwreck location. Maybe the line can be black as opposed to the usual red color. And then this would be paired with whatever musical score, whatever leitmotif is associated with the villains. Shortly after, though, the familiar red line starts to form, indicating that it's the heroes, Indy and Shorty, they're following behind. And then that would be paired with either the classic Indiana Jones March main theme, we could do a version of Shorty's leitmotif from Temple of Doom, or really just any heroic music signifying this duo. Like, if we have a new leitmotif for this movie to represent Indy and Shorty working together, then use that. But the main idea is that black line is showing the villains traveling, and then red line is showing the heroes traveling. So now we're in Syracuse. We follow Indy and Shorty. They're looking for the final resting place of Archimedes, as it's most likely that he had the dial's little key on him when he died. Voeller's team is also looking in Syracuse, but they can be in a different area of the city, so we don't see them immediately in this sequence. I think if we're doing Archimedes' tomb as a set piece, it makes more sense for it to be hidden somewhere in the city itself than some cave on the outskirts. So this sequence is actually going to be pretty similar to the whole Venice sequence from Last Crusade. What I'm kind of envisioning is 3 puzzles based on math principles that Archimedes was known for. First, I'm thinking that we can have an Archimedean spiral, and it'll turn into a spiral staircase going down underground. The second puzzle, I'm kind of thinking something with spheres, maybe also astronomy or planet measurements. And then third, we keep the water displacement from the official movie. Indy and Shorty get through these 3 devices. Again, Indy providing the historical perspective at Archimedes, and then Shorty with the mechanical perspective. They find Archimedes' tomb, and the area surrounding it has some imagery of a Roman battle. Indy remarks that Archimedes died during the siege of Syracuse. The official movie has this little icon of a winged beast with propeller-like claws. We can keep that, but I won't really have the characters draw specific attention to it. It's just like a thing in the background for us to pick up on. The duo can open the tomb, and they'll find Archimedes' skeleton. Buried with him is a key-like artifact. Shorty mentions that this thing must be what unlocks the Antikythera's internal mechanisms, and then with it, the dial's power can be realized. Another voice says, "That's right, what you found is the last piece we need. You've been very helpful." Voeller and his crew suddenly arrive in the tomb chamber. The villains take the key artifact and then they apprehend our duo. As the sun sets in Syracuse, we relocate to an airfield and it becomes a cloud, really bordering on stormy night. There's a large plane there waiting to launch, and waiting outside it are Hulk, the big guy, holding Indian Shorty, and then Helena is holding the dial. She unlocks it with the key and starts fiddling with it, just being herself, personality. Shorty watches this and actually gets a pretty good look at the dial and kind of realizes how it works. He can start excitingly talking about how it's actually going to locate fissures in time, doing the whole Kihai Kwan, nerdy rambling, just excitable, very fun character. But as he's rambling, Voller and Kleber, they get out of the plane and they're in uniform. Helena is surprised to see what they're wearing and asks why they're dressed like Nazis. Indy answers, because they are Nazis. So Voller switched sides to be safe with the winners, but he always knew about the dial, and he could potentially go back and change things. Although he did require Indy and Shorty to complete the quest for the dial. Perhaps they should have stayed in New York, he says. And then we get the Indy quip, you should have stayed out of Poland. We're actually going to use a lot of the anti-Nazi dialogue from the official movie here, because some of it's actually pretty good. That's what Indy's about, just anti-Nazis. Indy asks what the plan is, kill Churchill, kill Ike. Kleber, being the trigger-happy doofus that he is, chimes in that they're going to shoot Hitler. I think Helena can ask them what kind of Nazi wants to kill the Fuhrer, let the Allies win the war. I'm working them to say something like, you didn't win, Hitler lost. The Fuhrer made mistakes, but they're mistakes that Voller can fix. Voller and Kleber get onto the plane, and it starts moving. This is where we're really going to redeem Helena. She can help our duo get free from Hulk. She's not the black market artifact dealer, but that's not as evil as a Nazi, so she's going to help our heroes out. You're going after that plane, she tells them. Shorty asks how, but Indy can say, we'll make it up as we go. So to get on the plane, we get a pretty similar scene to this one moment from the first Captain America movie. Car drives people to a moving plane, and then the people just barely get on. Once they're on the plane, since we haven't gotten an opportunity to do this yet in the movie, I want a shot similar to one from Temple of Doom. So in that movie, both of these shots that I'm thinking of, they're of the duo, this particular duo, Indy and Shorty, fighting these Tuggy cult members. One of the shots shows them both kind of side by side. Another shot starts on Indy, and then it's just focused to Shorty. But it's those two fighting enemies. So do one of this visual or both of this type of visual, just with them fighting Nazis instead. But they've dispatched all the enemies, so then they head towards the cockpit. Just outside of it, they confront Voller, who has the dial and it's working. He reveals that he still has the Lance of Longinus from the opening. He gives the blade to Kleber to have his lackey fight our duo, and then he actually heads into the cockpit. Indy notices something specific about the lance blade, and the camera can position so that we notice it too. The blade is the same metal as the plane hull. Like, not just the same type of metal. There's a specific detail, like a bolt mark or something. It's present on both the plane and in the lance blade. Indy thinks on this. How could this be possible? We're not going to 1939, he starts to say. Eventually, Voller hears him and demands an explanation. I'm sure he's also been thinking on the possibility once he started to notice Indy put things together. So it's actually Shorty, him being the one with more of the mechanical understanding of the dial, who can get the line about continental drift. Voller's calculations are wrong. I don't know where we're going, but it sure as hell ain't 1939. There's no time to change course, and the plane enters the time vortex. We get a pretty similar scene as the official movie. The Nazis think that their plan worked, but then Indy notices the Roman triremes. This is the Siege of Syracuse, 212 BC. The one change I want to make is that since I'm only having one plane go back to the past, it does have to stay intact and land safely. I'm envisioning that Voller and his crew would pretty much panic so that Indy and Shorty can take over flying. I don't have any details really beyond that though. But they land the plane. At some point in the conversation that was happening when the characters realized that they're in 212 BC, it could be stated that this is the time of Archimedes and the dial was made by him, just reminding that that's the case. So the first order of business is to go look for the mathematician. Voller, Kleber, any remaining Nazi underlings, they head out of the plane first. While they do this, Indy shares an additional piece of information with Shorty. This battle is when and where Archimedes dies. At the end of the siege, a soldier goes against orders and kills him. So they have to be extra careful. The setting is just very dangerous. This point is emphasized when, a little later on, we see what happens to Kleber and the Nazis. They're going to end up killed by the Romans. I don't have a solid choice in mind for the specifics of their deaths, but make it as brutal as you can for PG-13. One thought is, in the official movie, there's a moment where some Roman projectile weaponry hits and damages the plane. I say that can be how Kleber dies. Instead of hitting the plane, it'll just hit him on the ground. Maybe we'd give the villains a line a bit earlier in the film about how the Nazi regime potentially could have rivaled the power and scale of the Roman Empire. That would be some foreshadowing, and it gives Kleber's death some irony, but I don't know if that's where I'd put that, or if the movie really even needs it. Kleber's already obsessed with shooting his little gun, and then he dies from a different type of gun, a different type of projectile weapon. So, the irony is already there. But anyway, once we're at the point where any Roman soldiers have just left the scene, we can show Indy and Shorty react to Kleber and the Nazis' deaths. Then they continue to look for Archimedes. But actually, he is going to find them, because he would probably investigate all the commotion. We get a pretty similar scene with him as in the official movie, but what I want to discuss, one detail. In the official movie, it's revealed that the dial was only designed to be able to find the time vortexes that go to 212 BC. This idea makes sense, but I also think it makes the Antikythera a little less interesting. My version of the scene is actually going to have Archimedes, instead of just handing the dial back to Indy, he's actually going to set it to find a time fissure that's going to take Indy and Shorty back. I think it'd be interesting to actually see Archimedes using the invention, and since it's his, it's not really a stretch that he would know how to use it, in just a sense to look for the reverse of whatever time fissure the dial was already set out to find, if that makes sense. I like this idea better than worrying about a closing time portal. I think if time fissure vortexes, they're somewhat out there of a concept, but it's only out there if the portals stay clearly open and visible for long periods of time. I think something slightly more grounded is that these fissures, they're not noticeable unless you're very close to them, and that's why you need the Antikythera to detect them. But now Indy and Shorty have that ability. So the duo heads back to the plane. Shorty is examining but not changing the settings on the dial as he walks. He's so intrigued by the device that he doesn't notice that Indy has stopped walking. "What if I stayed?" Indy says. "What?" Shorty replies. Indy continues. "We're witnessing history. I've imagined this, studied it all my life. There's more for me here than anything back home." Shorty hears this and then launches into a ramble. How could you think this? We're witnessing new exciting history every day. Remember the moon landing, the space race, happened right before the events of this movie. This would mess with time, etc., whatever you want to ramble about. Then he stops. None of his scientific, mechanical knowledge is going to really sway or persuade Indy. "Indiana," he says. I would have this be the first time in the film Shorty says the full name as opposed to Indy or Dr. Jones. And then that word, Indiana, that's all we hear. Shorty's still going to say something to Indy, something that's going to convince him to go back, but the sound will be edited in such a way that we don't actually hear it. In fact, as this moment kind of fades, we're just going to cut to the duo reboarding the plane. We see them start up the engines, mess with the controls, and then take off. Everything seems to be going pretty smoothly, and they can even start to see the fissure without much use of the dial. So Shorty turns around again to grab the dial, just to double check the position, except there's already a hand on it. Voller had gotten back on the plane while Indy and Shorty met Archimedes, waiting for them to return and then get in the air again. The villain explains that he still intends to travel to 1939, and he starts adjusting to the dial. The action doesn't really affect the plane's motion because that's not how the dial and time fissures work in this movie, but we do start to notice what I'm going to call time turbulence as the plane moves through the portal. Shorty offers an explanation. Archimedes built the device with a focus on fissures going to 212 BC. It can still find other types of fissures, but they're likely to take longer to move through, and they're going to be rougher, like this one. It's so rough, in fact, that the plane's hull starts to take strange damage. Parts of it are aging, rusting, and decaying at different and varied speeds. Shorty and Indy take notice, but Voller's pretty preoccupied with the dial. He finally stops fiddling with it, says 1939 again, and takes a step back. But where he landed was a low sidewall section, just weakened by all the time turbulence, and he starts to slip out of the gap in the plane. He seems to hold on for a beat, but the time turbulence just forces him flying out. I want this death of the main villain to be on the same level of just some of the other Indiana Jones villains' demises. Just really get creative and make time turbulence something that's pretty terrifying. We take a moment to let the weight of Voller's death sink in. Once again, an Indiana Jones villain defeated by the power of the artifact that they craved. But speaking of that power, the time turbulence continues affecting the plane, and now it's gotten to the point where even the dial is getting affected. It's becoming aged and damaged as well. The entire time it's looked somewhat like it did in the official movie, like polished bronze, but now we see rust and disfigurement start to form on the gears. It even starts to break apart. Thinking quickly, Shorty goes and grabs it, but the time turbulence, with almost a mind of its own, it wants pieces of the artifact to loosen and fly out of the plane. It's a struggle. Shorty explains that he wants to save the dial. It's a mechanism that allows for unparalleled discovery of history, and he wants to save it so that Indy can have it. Indy listens. He answers with this: "I know, but it's too dangerous. Shorty, let it go." So I've been using that name to refer to this character for the whole pitch, but in the movie, Indy would have been saying Dr. Lee or Juan. So this is the first time in the movie Indy uses Shorty, and it should be a powerful moment. Shorty loosens his grip on the dial, some pieces break off and get sucked into the air, but this strangely seems to calm the time turbulence down. It's not a force we understand, but it's over now. The plane gets closer to the end of the Fisher portal and then it smoothly makes it through. The stormy weather that's become familiar turns into a beautiful 1969 sunrise, and we get a shot of the plane flying into it. I'm kind of envisioning it looking visually similar to the shot of the plane flying off at the end of the opening sequence, the beginning of the movie of Raiders, but basically the adventure is complete. We cut to an establishing shot of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. The next shot is inside, and we see that Sal is there telling a story to his grandchildren. Shorty is also present, just listening to the tale. It can be the same excerpt from the official movie. Indy and Marion were running, and then the plane exploded. It's a fun little reference to Raiders. We keep moving through the museum hallways and see that Indy is there too, but he's looking at an exhibit. We see that it's the Antikythera that's on display, looking really how it does in real life, all ancient and rusted. If you look at the other Indiana Jones movies, it takes a bit of a stretch, but not a huge stretch, really, to imagine that the story could have actually happened, especially when you think about the ending fates of the different artifacts. Like, take the Ark of the Covenant, for example. In real life, nobody knows where it is or what it can do. In Raiders, we end the movie with the Ark getting put into a location that few people know about, and only two people, Indy and Marion, have really learned about its power. So my point is that the stretch isn't that huge. And challenge comes because, unlike all the other Indiana Jones movie artifacts, the Antikythera is more real and more known about, and in real life it resides at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. That's canon, and I can't change it. So I didn't. I will say that in real life, it's been determined that the real Antikythera's ability was to track astronomy, not time fissures, but maybe in the universe of Indiana Jones, there's a connection between astronomical positions and time fissure locations. But anyway, I'm basically trying to continue the theme that every Indiana Jones movie is like the untold story of a particular artifact, and the stories end with something similar enough to the real-world status quo. So we're in the museum, looking at the Antikythera mechanism gears, and they're on display. Maybe we can see the information plaque that it was recovered by Henry Indiana Jones Jr. and Juan Shorty Lee. I don't know if I'd really want that or need that, though. But the camera keeps moving, and then we see that Marion Ravenhood has arrived next to Indy. The first words out of Indy's mouth are, I tried to save him. He continues, this dial is something else. It's broken now, but it had great power. For his description of the artifact, he talks slightly more excitedly. It allowed me to witness history. The somber tone returns, though, but not change it. Mutt's still gone, Marion. I'm sorry. Marion now responds, try to think of what you've found rather than what you've lost. I heard you were back. Are you back, Indy? As she says this, the camera can show the other people in the museum, people Indy recently reconnected with. Marion finishes with, I know it hurts. And then that leads Indy to say, where doesn't it hurt? And from there we get the same bit with these two characters as the official movie. Once that wraps up, the couple walks over to the other characters in the museum, like Shorty, Sala, their family, and now we need our final shot, which I want to be somewhat particular about. The Indiana Jones franchise is usually really good with these. Temple of Dooms isn't that memorable, but Raiders is perfect for the first installment of this franchise and gives me chills just every time. And Last Crusade and arguably Crystal Skull, they both work really well as endings for the franchise. And then the credits just hitting the screen with the classic musical score, it just never fails to put a smile on my face. But anyway, all this means coming up with a final shot, it's just a bit of a challenge. You need something that gives a sense of finality, and then the ending image has to be something that we can roll a good amount of the credits over before fading to black. So here's the best I came up with given the setting that I picked for the last scene. We cut to the front exterior of the museum as the party steps out to the front pavilion. Sally tells his grandkids to go ahead, he'll be right behind him. They head off, and now we're left with Indy, Marion, Sal, and Shorty, the four surviving major characters of this franchise. They stand together and take one last look at the museum. I don't think we need to specifically have dialogue saying this, but the idea that an important artifact belongs in a museum has finally been completed, and it's a museum in its country of origin. When the group turns around, the camera can move with them, or it can just be a cut, but they're now facing west, revealing a beautiful sunset over the city. And we end the movie with our heroes walking off into it. And the music swells, and credits start to come over the scene. So that's my rewrite. I kept pretty much the same plot, but changed some details. I elaborated on some reasons for my changes during the pitch, but I just want to mention a few things now at the end. I kept Indy's character arc the same as what the official movie is kind of trying to do. He starts off somewhat depressed and broken, but by having one last adventure, returns to the spirit of his former self. And the adventure is with Shorty. As opposed to the other characters who are both in the official movie and my version, I basically wrote Shorty from scratch. I came up really just with the details of how he'd fit into the story, but for the actual movie, I'd imagine Ke Huy Quan bringing a lot more detail and energy to the character. Really, I'm just envisioning a good contrast and fun dynamic between Indy and Shorty. Two characters repairing their relationship while using their different skill sets on an adventure. Speaking of this type of central dynamic, you probably noticed some similarities to Last Crusade in my version of Dial of Destiny. I did that for a reason. Last Crusade is probably the best Indiana Jones movie, and it's just a fantastic last entry for the character. So if I'm trying to make my definitive final entry, I'll just happily borrow some ideas. Also,
again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Yeah, this whole rewrite was a lot of setup so I could hit you with that clip. I hope you enjoyed my ideas. I'm going to take this costume off. I like doing the jacket and khakis because it's what Indiana Jones wears, but it's getting really warm, so I'm going to take that off. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the ideas, and thank you for watching my YouTube video.